Hey everyone, John Chappell, and this is the first of two PowerPoints on the Watergate scandal that brings down the Nixon administration. And hopefully this won't come across as overkill, but I want to go into a little bit of detail about this, and it's too long to put in one PowerPoint, so I've broken it into two. And this will supplement what Foner says about it because I want to emphasize why the scandal was important. So let's jump in. 1972, Nixon was in an election year. Remember, he'd been elected in 1968. And Nixon's first term, by any measurement, was highly successful. He had achieved important results in both domestic and foreign legislation. He was close to ending American involvement in the Vietnam War. And so all expectations were that Nixon would be reelected no matter who the Democratic Party ran as its candidate. The party selected a senator from South Dakota, George McGovern. What the American public didn't know is that the Nixon campaign was from the beginning engaged in a variety of unethical and, in other cases, illegal tactics against McGovern, and even before McGovern got the nomination, things that had been directed against other potential Democratic nominees. And this was an outgrowth of illegal activity that the Nixon administration had implemented against critics of Nixon's Vietnam policies in particular. So it carried over from that into the Nixon campaign's approach to politics. So you see in this slide a picture of the Watergate complex in Washington, D.C. If any of you have been to Washington, D.C., and you do one of the tram tours around the city, they always take you by this. Any of you know where the Kennedy Center is? When you come out of the Kennedy Center, if you look to your left, you can still see the Watergate complex. It looks pretty similar to what it did back in the 1970s. When it opened in the early 70s, the Watergate complex was this upscale, fashionable development that was mixed business and residential, very much like things you see today. So there were business offices, but also people who rented apartments within the Watergate complex. And it's in the summer of 1972, there's an evening when a security guard is making rounds, comes to a door that was supposed to be locked, that was unlocked, and he notices that somebody has taped over the lock. And this was a suite of offices used by the Democratic Party's National Committee. So it's not the McGovern campaign, but the party's National Committee, which of course is coordinating with the McGovern campaign. So this is one single security guard. He doesn't know what's going on, so he decides to call the Washington, D.C. police. And the police officers who arrived were actually a group of guys who had been in a drug sting operation and were undercover, although some uniformed officers joined them shortly later. And this whole group enters this suite of offices. So what they find when they go in is a group of 5 men dressed in black, wearing black gloves, some of them with masks, who seem to be in the process of placing listening devices on phones in these offices. It was determined later that there had been previous break-ins by this group, and they were actually checking on some bugging equipment, as it was called, that they had placed earlier that didn't seem to be working. Out of this group, 4 of the men were Cuban Americans. The only American is the guy on the left, James McCord, who was a former CIA agent but was now working for the Nixon campaign. So initially, this was reported as some sort of burglary. The Nixon administration released a statement saying, oh, we don't know what was going on. We'll launch an investigation to get to the bottom of it. All of the burglars, as they were referred to originally, refused to answer any questions under police questioning. Eventually, McCord ended up testifying in the Watergate hearings, but that only came after a judge threatened them with harsher sentences if they didn't talk. But initially, for quite some time, it was still kind of murky exactly what they were doing. And Nixon went on to win the election overwhelmingly over George McGovern. So the Watergate break-in didn't have any direct impact on the election of 1972. When this incident first happened, the Washington Post gave the story to two young reporters that you see here, Carl Bernstein and Bob Woodard. They were relatively new, low-level reporters, and most of their work had been doing stories in a kind of police beat column that appeared in the Washington Post that summarized local crime. And so that's why this was tossed off to them, because it was looked at as some sort of local crime initially. Woodard and Bernstein, though, began to probe more deeply into what happened. And as I note here, through a lot of hard work, some degree of luck, they began to unravel a very complicated story of corruption and illegal action in the Nixon administration. First, they're uncovering this within Nixon's campaign organization, but it begins to lead them to people within the Nixon administration itself. During the course of their work, they received valuable tips and information from a man you see here on the slide, Mark Felt, who was higher up in the FBI. He was an associate director of the FBI. So there were multiple investigations going on. You had the Washington, D.C. police conducting an investigation. You had Woodard and Bernstein digging for details and publishing their findings in the Washington Post. And as it became evident that the implications of this made it a federal case, federal crime, that's why the FBI became involved, the Federal Bureau of Investigation. So Felt met secretively with Bob Woodard, meeting primarily in parking garages in and around Washington, D.C. This is depicted very well in the film All the President's Men, and would share anonymously. He was never quoted, and they protected his identity, in fact, until he died. But he would share information that the FBI had learned from its investigation. By the summer of 1973, there was enough damaging evidence accumulated that the Senate launched an investigation as well. So again, as I said, you've had the Washington, D.C. police investigating, the FBI, Woodard and Bernstein, now a Senate committee headed by Senator Sam Ervin, and therefore known as the Ervin Committee, began in the summer of 73 televised hearings. These were on most of the day and displaced all regular daytime programming. Soap operas, game shows, none of that was seen. It was all Watergate hearings, and these had very high ratings. A lot of Americans were watching them as more evidence unfolded. So there were dozens of witnesses the Ervin Committee interviewed. The most damaging testimony for Nixon came from his White House counsel, John Dean, the White House lawyer. And Dean's testimony centered primarily on notes he had taken. Like any good lawyer, he kept detailed records of his meetings with Nixon, what day he met, what time, what they talked about, summarizing their discussions. And so Dean had this very detailed evidence that he presented about his conversations with President Nixon. Now, Dean maintained that as far as he knew, that Nixon didn't know anything about the break-in before it happened. But once he learned about it, Dean testified that Nixon's response was to conceal or cover up any connection between the burglars and his administration or his campaign. So rather than getting to the bottom of what had happened, as Nixon professed he would do, instead he went into damage control. And this included Dean's testimony that the Watergate burglars themselves had been offered hush money, $100,000 apiece, not to talk, which was why they didn't initially. So he has all this damaging testimony along with specific dates and times of the conversations with Nixon. So the implications, as I say here, mean that if John Dean is telling the truth, if his testimony is truthful, it meant that Richard Nixon had been lying to the public and to Congress for months, and that he had obstructed justice by hindering these active investigations by the police, by the FBI, and now by the Irvin Committee. And I already mentioned in the previous slide this detail that I have here that Dean laid out Nixon approving the payment of $100,000 cash to each of the burglars in exchange for their silence. As the Watergate scandal unfolded and as the Irvin administration or the Irvin Committee pushed ahead, various officials began to resign. Several were convicted and sentenced to jail, including Attorney General John Mitchell, who was actively involved in the cover-up. So this is the nation's top law enforcement official, essentially. If you're an Attorney General, you had the Department of Justice. And so rather than working and cooperating with the investigation, Mitchell was involved in trying to hinder it and cover things up. Nixon's two top aides, John Ehrlichman and H.R. Haldeman, both resigned and received jail sentences as well. So in part 2 of the Watergate saga, we'll look at the next phase, which is a battle over taped recordings from the White House that leads to Richard Nixon's resignation.